"You said it was 15 miles," I complained. "So it is, till we reach this coast at Cuxhaven; but I suppose you may say we're at sea; of course that's all sand over there to starboard. Look, some of it's showing already." He pointed into the north. Looking more attentively, I noticed that outside the line of buoys patches of the surface heaved and worked; in one or two places streaks and circles of white were forming; in the midst of one such circle a sleek mauve hump had risen, like the back of a sleeping whale. I saw that an old spell was enthralling Davies as his eye travelled away to the black horizon. He scanned it all with a critical eagerness, too, as one who looks for a new meaning in an old friend's face. Something of his zest was communicated to me, and stilled the shuddering thrill that had seized me. The protecting land was still a comforting neighbour, but our severance with it came quickly. The tide whirled us down, and our straining canvas aiding it, we were soon off Cuxhaven, which crouched so low behind its mighty dyke that of some of its houses only the chimneys were visible. Then, a mile or so on, the shore sharpened to a point like a claw, where the innocent dyke became a long, low fort, with some great guns peeping over; then of a sudden it ceased, retreating into the far south, in a dim perspective of groins and dunes. We spun out into the open and leant heavily over the now unobstructed wind. The yacht rose and sank to a little swell, but my first impression was one of wonder at the calmness of the sea, for the wind blew fresh and free from horizon to horizon. "Why, it's all sand there now, and we're under the lee of it," said Davies, with an enthusiastic sweep of his hand over the sea on our left, or port, hand. "That's our hunting ground." "What are we going to do?" I inquired. "Pick up Sticker's Gat," was the reply. "It ought to be near Buoy K." A red buoy with a huge K on it soon came into view. Davies peered over to port. "Just pull up the centreboard, will you?" he remarked abstractedly, adding, "and hand me up the glasses as you're down there." "Oh, never mind the glasses, I've got it now; come to the main sheet," was the next remark. He put down with the helm and headed the yacht straight for the troubled and discoloured expanse which covered the submerged sands. A sleeping whale, with the light surf splashing on it, was right in our path. "Stand by the lead, will you?" said Davies politely. "I'll manage the sheets; it's a dead beat in. Ready about." The wind was in our teeth now, and for a crowded half hour we wormed ourselves forward by ever-shortening tacks into the sinuous recesses of a channel which threaded the shallows westward. I knelt in a tangle of line, and under the hazy impression that something very critical was going on, plied the lead furiously, bumping and splashing myself, and shouting out the depths, which lessened steadily, with a great sense of the importance of my function. Davies never seemed to listen, but tacked on imperturbably, juggling with the tiller, the sheets, and the chart in a way that made one giddy to look at. For all our zeal we seemed to be making very slow progress. "It's no use, tide's too strong; we must chance it," he said at last. Chance what? I wondered to myself. Our tacks suddenly began to grow longer, and the depths, which I registered, shallower. All went well for some time though, and we made better progress. Then came a longer reach than usual. 2½ 2 1½ 1 only 5 feet, I gasped reproachfully. The water was growing thick and frothy. "It doesn't matter if we do," said Davies, thinking aloud. "There's an eddy here, and it's a pity to waste it. Ready about! Back the jib!" But it was too late. The yacht answered but faintly to the helm, stopped, and heeled heavily over, wallowing and grinding. Davies had the mainsail down in a twinkling; it half smothered me as I crouched on the lee side among my tangled skeins of line, scared and helpless. I crawled out from the folds and saw him standing by the mast in a reverie. "It's not much use," he said, on a falling tide, but we'll try kedging off. Pay that warp out while I run out the kedge." Like lightning he had cast off the dinghy's painter, tumbled the kedge anchor and himself into the dinghy, pulled out 50 yards into the deeper water, and heaved out the anchor. "Now haul!" he shouted. I hauled, beginning to see what "kedging off" meant. "Steady on, don't sweat yourself," said Davies, jumping aboard again. "It's coming," I spluttered triumphantly. "The warp is, the yacht isn't. You're dragging the anchor home. Never mind, she'll lie well here. Let's have lunch." The yacht was motionless, and the water round her visibly lower. Petulant waves slapped against her sides, but, scattered as my senses were, I realised that there was no vestige of danger. Round us the whole face of the waters was changing from moment to moment, whitening in some places, yellowing in others, while breadths of sand began to be exposed. Close on our right the channel we had left began to look like a turbid little river, and I understood why our progress had been so slow when I saw its current racing back to meet the Elbe. Davies was already below, laying out a more than usually elaborate lunch, in high content of mind. "Lies quiet, doesn't she?" he remarked. "If you do want to sit down lunch, there's nothing like running aground for it. And anyhow, we're as handy for work here as anywhere else. You'll see." Like most landsmen, I had a wholesome prejudice against running aground, so that my mentor's turn for breezy paradox was at first rather exasperating. After lunch the large-scale chart of the estuaries was brought down, and we pored over it together, mapping out work for the next few days. There's no need to tire the general reader with its intricacies, nor is there space to reproduce it here for the benefit of the instructed reader. For both classes the general map should be sufficient, taken with a large-scale fragment which gives a fair example of the region in detail. It will be seen that the three broad fairways of the Jade, Weser, and Elbe split up the sands into two main groups. The westernmost of these is symmetrical in outline, an acute-angled triangle, very like a sharp steel-shod pike, if you imagine the peninsula from which it springs to be the wooden haft. The other is a huge congeries of banks, its base resting on the Hanover coast, two of its sides tolerably clean and even, and the third, that facing the northwest, ribboned and lacerated by the fury of the sea, which has eaten out deep cavities and struck hungry tentacles far into the interior. The whole resembles an inverted E, or better still, a rude fork, on whose three deadly prongs, the Scharhorn reef, the Knecht sand, and the Tegeler flat, as on the no less deadly point of the pike, many a good ship splinters herself in northerly gales. Following this simile, the Hohenhörn bank, where Davies was wrecked, is one of those that lie between the upper and middle prongs. Our business was to explore the pike and the fork and the channels which ramify through them. I use the general word channel, but in fact they differ widely in character, and are called in German by various names: Balje, Gut, Loch, Deep, Rinne. For my purpose I need only divide them into two sorts, those which have water in them at all states of the tide, and those which have not, which dry off, that is, either wholly or partly at low tide. Davies explained that the latter would take most learning, and were to be our chief concern, because they were the through routes, the connecting links between the estuaries. You can always detect them on the chart by rows of little Y-shaped strokes denoting booms, that is to say poles or saplings fixed in the sand to mark the passage. The strokes, of course, are only conventional signs, and do not correspond in the least to individual booms, which are far too numerous and complex to be indicated accurately on a chart, even of the largest scale. The same applies to the course of the channels themselves, whose minor meanderings cannot be reproduced. It was on the edge of one of these tidal swatchways that the yacht was now lying. It is called Sticker's Gat, and you cannot miss it if you carry your eye westward along our course from Cuxhaven. It was, so Davies told me, the last and most intricate stage